Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining this session, the panel for regional data for 3D monitoring. I will give a brief introduction, so read the description about the panel first. And then I will give the logistics of how this panel will work. So the IMS was designed as a sparse global network with the purpose of detecting nuclear explosions. But the sparseness of the network and other factors limit the accuracy of the location of events detected by the IMS stations. To improve the location capabilities, the IMS depends on reference events, also known as ground truth events, which are events that the spatio-temporal origin of which is known with high confidence, and the characterization of such events as ground truth requires the use of dense national and regional networks and cooperation among national data centers. And furthermore, such cooperation enhances the monitoring capabilities of the NDCs as it allows them to surpass the capabilities of the IMS. So in this panel, we will discuss the synergy between the IMS and the regional experts and the NDCs, and in particular benefits 3D monitoring has reaped from regional expert contributions, how the CTBTO contributes to regional needs, and how this synergy can be facilitated and further extended in the future. So our panelists today are Ayele Atalay, a professor in the University of Addis Ababa. I will give a proper introduction a little bit later. Michelle Grobler from the Council of Geosciences in Pretoria, South Africa. Robert Mellor from the University of California, San Diego. Ronnie Quintero from Costa Rica, and Titus from the Geological Survey of Namibia. So the way this panel will work is that each one of the panelists will give a brief introduction of their, let's say, thesis about the topic. And at the same time, please, everybody, submit your questions, any questions you might have in the chat. And after all the presentations or all the talks have been over, then we will start with questions from the audience. So first one to talk is Professor Ayele Atalay, who received his degree in physics from Addis Ababa University and a PhD in geophysics from Uppsala University in Sweden. As I said before, he's a professor at the Institute of Geophysics, Space Science and Astronomy of Addis Ababa University. And he's also the chairman of the African Seismological Commission. And he's going to give us an overview of the challenges the NDCs are facing in sharing data with the CTBTO and other organizations, or NDCs, in particular in East Africa. Thank you for joining us, Atalay. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Where is my PowerPoint? I thought, yeah, it's here. Thank you for having me to this discussion. Just to start the panel discussion, I would like to talk about a bit on the regional capacity for 3D monitoring. I mean, the case in East Africa, how it works here, and just for the sake of the panel discussion, my slides are very few. So the Ims network is sparse in Africa in general, while the continent is really big. And also the capacity in human resource, communication and maintaining NDC capacity in East Africa is another challenge. So I believe these two issues affect location of 3D relevant events.
Excuse me for interrupting. I think are you sharing a presentation, because we don't see it?
You don't see it?
No, we see you.
Ah, you see me. I thought I shared it. Sorry.
I think maybe it needs to confirm when you share a file.
Okay, share and click this one, isn't it?
Yes.
How about now?
Yes. It's up now, yes.
I'm
If
sorry
you would
about
like
that.
maximize
So,
the slideshow presentation, thank you.
yeah, so I was in the background, so maybe that's the best place to start. So what I was trying to say is that the international monitoring stations network in Africa in general is very sparse, while the continent is big. And the human capacity also has another challenge. I mean, resource communication and maintaining NDC capacity is always a problem in this part of the world. And so these 2 points can affect location of treaty relevant events. So if we see the network, the IMS network in Africa, there are very few. And my focus in this remark is on seismic stations. Probably, you know, the IMS in general can be other technologies as well. So compared to the size of the African continent, the facilities that we are running here in Africa are very few in number. In general, the East African Rift is a really huge interest in the global stage. Generally from the NIC or the USGS catalog, roughly the East African Rift looks to have this kind of seismicity starting from the 1973 onwards, and the yellow spots are the ones captured by different experiments, temporary experiments. So there are several of them there. So it's really an international interest for basic science research. So in 1993, we have set up a group called the Eastern and Southern Africa Regional Seismological Working Group. The founding members, they used to produce earthquake bulletins from analog seismograms, which was really difficult at that time. And the support came from the ISCP, International Science Program of Uppsala University. So there were only few stations in Africa at that time, and most of them were analog ones, like the one you see here. So they were carrying these analog seismograms to hold workshops from one country to another on rotation basis. And the data is limited by bandwidth, dynamic range, timing, and also difficult to transport these seismograms. So the one I show you here is, I'm sorry, there is a noise, just unusual. Someone is just on the roof. So this is a 1969 third earthquake as recorded at AA station. So once in a while, we hold workshops in the region. For instance, this is a workshop in Asmara in 2013. So from the old seismograph era, I mean, from the analog era, now we came to the digital era, and we hold workshops like that one, coming with parameter data from each country. So finally, we produce bulletins like the one you see here on the right, and we archive these earthquake bulletins in each country, and also we send it to the International Science Seismological Center, sorry, ISCC. So IMS seismic stations hosted in our continent, I mean in East Africa, are like ATD, Furi, Kimbo in Kenya, Elesik in Zambia, and Mbaro also in Uganda. Some countries do not get data of the stations that they host. It's very strange, and I mean, in some countries they don't even see what the data look like, and that's really a challenge. For instance, this helicorder shows recent Nyaragongo volcanic activity that happened starting from June 22, 2001. And this is recorded in the Ugandan station. So this can be even used as a ground truth event if really the cooperation among Ndcs in East Africa was really smooth enough. This is a very, very nice one, ground zero almost, because the Nyaragongo location is very precise. So the challenges are really to build a capacity and sustaining it is a big challenge. Lack of adequate funding, lack of motivation and commitment, less government interest in injecting funding. Organizations like CTBTO provided also training, but it's short and one-time affair most of the time, where the knowledge does not last long. So this is really a challenge. CTBTO has provided training on different occasions, hosting, co-hosting workshops in North Africa, Southern Africa region, in Namibia, South Africa, I think Morocco and Cairo as well. But what I notice is that, those skills and trainings does not sustain long. So maybe I'm trying to invoke this discussion on the way forward. Maybe we can suggest, or somebody else may comment some solutions for the consumption of this panel discussion. So what I'm trying to put across here is that there are IMS stations running in the region. There are also other stations also hosted by like USGS, for instance, and JOFON and GFZ as well. But the regional capacity is really poor enough to accommodate this skills and knowledge and contribute to verification of the treaty. So I think that's what I'd like to comment. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Atalay, for highlighting also these challenges that NDCs in West Africa face, and I'm sure these challenges are also in other parts of the world. So I will now give the floor to Michelle. Michelle Grobler has been working with the CTBTO since 1997 at the Council of Geoscience in South Africa, which utilizes CTBTO data in the daily analysis. Michelle is passionate about regional cooperation amongst the countries within Africa. She has led a number of regional CTBTO training courses over the years and has been actively engaged in the Africa Array project, which aims to increase the seismic monitoring within Africa. In addition, she has helped start the African Seismological Commission under the umbrella of IASPEI in 2014 and is currently the secretary. Over the years, she has had the privilege to assist with the installation and maintenance of national seismograph networks within various African countries in order to improve regional monitoring on the continent and, of course, cooperation. Within South Africa, she has been involved in projects which aim to establish ground truth events from not only the mines, but also other forms of blasting activities. Currently, she is interested in investigating the possibility of correlating infrasound data with ground truth data obtained from an open-cast mining region. And I should also add here that Michelle has been the task leader for the technological refreshment at the CTBTO for some years now. So, Michelle, thank you for joining, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. So I will talk broadly about regional data for treaty monitoring, trying to address a number of issues, actually, very similar to Atalay's, but maybe a little bit more broader reaching. So the IMS seismic network, like any other seismological network, does require some sort of tweaking in order to improve the accuracy of locating seismic events, especially since the events that are of particular interest for the IMS will probably occur in very remote areas, and it can occur on anywhere in the planet, on the planet. So there are a number of ways, obviously, about how to go about this tweaking process. But one of the best ways of assisting with tweaking is, of course, to monitor seismic events of which the location, depth, and magnitude are well known. And this, of course, is what we call the reference events or ground truth events. Now, coming back home to South Africa, we have a lot of mining, shallow and basically on the surface, and very deep, some of the deepest mines actually in the world. And this provides actually ample opportunities to investigate these ground truth events. In fact, These deep mines are often used as laboratories for earthquake monitoring, and because the faults themselves can actually be physically touched, and then they are monitored and investigated. A good example of a recent project with the International Continental Scientific Drilling Program, or ICDP. What happened there is that we drilled from the mine shaft into a fault, which caused the largest mining-related event in South Africa, a magnitude of 5.5. And in addition to that, they also installed seismic acoustic emission sensors in order to see if there were any precursors to these big events. So these type of faults are closely monitored by the mining operations themselves, who each have their own seismic systems underground. Now, this is in addition to your national network, which is with seismic systems installed on the surface. So they actually installed underground, so their accuracy of locating seismic events is within 100 meters. And of course, your open cast mining, you also have that typical accuracy. So with this kind of accuracy, the seismic events within the mines, both open cast and underground, make for perfect examples of ground truth events. Now, typically, the CTBTO doesn't necessarily have this type of information at hand, and thus state signatories can assist by providing regional information and data. For instance, before the regional seismic travel time workshop that was held in Namibia a few years ago, we also embarked on a project with the CTBTO to use these exact mine information, the mine seismic events, as to get to understand or to develop a database of ground truth events. It was a very successful project. Not only did it provide the much needed scientific information for these ground truth events, but it also encouraged collaboration between organizations, not only both nationally and regionally, and especially when it came to data sharing. Data sharing still is an issue between organizations and countries, because I believe it's probably often it's seen as a source of income, that they can sell this sort of information, and it's also seen as a source of perhaps exposing something that's a bit more confidential within the country. So these are the sort of hurdles which need to be overcome, and when coming to data sharing and collaboration. So what I've noticed is it often involves a lot of discussions, explanations as to what the information is going to be used for, and of course how it will benefit the country and the region or the international community as a whole. One tends to find that countries prefer to collaborate with their neighbors, probably because they feel that their neighbors tend to understand their point of view, know what situation they are in, and so they prefer to collaborate with their neighbors than rather further afield, and especially if the collaboration is good for the region. So thus there are often projects involving data sharing that can involve a number of countries. But one needs to make sure that it's beneficial for all participating in order to make it sustainable. One particular example is, for instance, the Africa Array project, which Christos mentioned. And here the participants benefit from the research that has been done, from stations that are installed in their country, and from education. Another example is, of course, the countries participating in the CTBTO. They have access to a rich source of data. They have access to analyzing software, which they can then use as well. What we've also experienced basically locally is that by assisting local communities with their needs during installation of a station also encourages the community to ensure the safety of the station. This is very similar to what the Executive Secretary presented to us at the one time about the installation of the radionuclide station in Niger, where they also helped the community. So when installing a station, one does need to keep this in mind, the needs of the host, and thus working with them to identify ways in which both parties can benefit. That is certainly the more successful way to go and goes a long way to encourage both collaboration and data sharing. Within the African group, it's been raised a number of times actually on how we can encourage this collaboration between NDCs. Often you find that across the world actually NDCs have varying skills and expertise, and so collaborating, especially between the regional NDCs, can certainly benefit all parties. A very good example is of course where NDCs can collaborate on the national preparedness exercises that are regularly held. But a problem which I've often noticed, and it touches on what Atale also just mentioned, is that in some countries, the CTBTO activities, they often play a small role in the staff's daily responsibilities. And thus the momentum that has been gained after training and station installation, it sort of starts to die out because it becomes a small part in their daily activities. And thus, of course, your collaboration as well between NDCs, it tends to start to fail there. So one aspect that could probably be considered to address this sort of lack of or loss of momentum is to perhaps create like a regional center, which could then assist the surrounding NDCs and perhaps arrange for regular training sessions and interactions and stuff like that, so that we can continue to keep up that momentum between the NDCs. Of course, the NDC forum is a great platform where NDCs can interact, but I sometimes wonder in people's busyness if they always find time to log in. So in conclusion, just to wrap up, firstly, results from local projects within different countries can be of use for the CTBTO, and there should perhaps be a call for countries, for states to share this information on any project within this line. For instance, as Christos has just mentioned, we have just embarked on a project to use data from our opencast mines as ground truth events to verify, calibrate the information data that we are picking up at our station. And I suppose this is the sort of information that we could basically share with CTBTO to improve the regional monitoring for the treaty. There is, of course, other relevant information that can be used for treaty monitoring as well, such as the local geology, your velocity models, your atmospheric models, bulletins or regular publications from national institutions, etc. Secondly, as I mentioned, when installing stations, one does need to keep in mind the needs of the host, and thus working together with them to identify ways in which both parties can benefit is certainly a more successful way to go and goes a long way to encourage collaboration and data sharing. And thirdly and lastly, regular get-togethers, both maybe in larger international groups, so that NDCs of varying states of development can then get to interact with each other, so we can big international groups, but also smaller regional groups. Because what one tends to happen is if you're in the big group, people get out, you don't get similar interaction, but you have smaller regular regional group interactions. People can then express their concerns, their problems, and then there can be a way that we can then try to start to address that. And that will then also maintain that momentum, hopefully, and take everything, the regional treaty monitoring forward, and of course encourage collaboration on a regional scale. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Michelle, for this section and some very nice suggestions there from you. Let me remind again the audience, please go ahead and submit your questions, and we will present them to our panelists here after they finish their presenting their positions. So now let's move to another continent. Let me introduce Ronnie Quintero, who has a master's degree in physics and mathematics and a PhD in seismology. He's a researcher at the Volcanological and Seismological Observatory of Costa Rica, Una. Is that okay?
Correct, yeah.
Correct, since 1999. He has been a coordinator of seismology in the Seismic Network of Una, professor at the National University, visiting professor outside of Costa Rica, and organizer of international courses and workshops, including several national NDC capacity building CTBTO workshops and seismic training in Costa Rica. He is the coordinator of the NDC in Costa Rica until, he has been the coordinator of the NDC in Costa Rica until 2020, and he's now station operator of the AES 25 station of the auxiliary station network. The main focus of his research has been on fundamental physics, understanding the earthquake process, and explores the crust under Costa Rica, and he has collected valuable knowledge and experience from fieldwork and data processing while working at the Una. And he's the author of several scientific articles. Ronnie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I want to share my. Okay. Thank you, Christopher, for your presentation. Thank you to Michelle and Atalay for pointing something there. One of the things when we see some ground truth event like this in the IEC web page is that we like some of the ground truth events in Central America and also in South America. When we think about, we want to study the air, we need to be part of the globe. And as habitants, we need to have also to be part of this research. As Atalay pointed out, this successful project or high-speed or Swedish project that we get education, people from Latin America, from Africa, and also from Asia. I think this type of capacity is stay longer. This is important for us in this such country like Latin America and I think Africa also. Why we have so lack of ground truth events in this part of the world? We see the majority are in the Mediterranean Sea, but not here in Latin America. Well, one of the things is perhaps the NDC, we see the local group, the NDC group and the Seismic hydroacoustic and infrasound group, they are not communicating between them in the local. That means we need to have more communication between us for all of them to know what the importance to have this such data or sharing data with the international group. But perhaps this is one of the challenges that we have to communicate in a better way with the local group in the same country. When we see this ground truth event like ground truth 5 event that have 95% confident to be between 5 kilometers error, the importance as we have seen in one of the workshops that we hold here in 2015 in Costa Rica with the RSTTD workshop, that this ground truth event is important for develop, for validate tree velocity model and a new algorithm for locating earthquake. This means that this is one of the important ground truth events for the community. As there are many many conditions for to say what type of event can be a ground truth 5 event or ground truth 10 or 15 kilometers. One of the conditions is perhaps that we see our country in Central America are small, and perhaps like this picture is showing that the station is only in one side of the country, but we have the border. The border, perhaps the earthquake are not exactly in this part of the country, but it's in the border. That means that we need to cooperate with the neighbor country to have a good location of, say, of one earthquake. To be able to fulfill the requirement for the condition for this for the ground truth event. Let's say why we have so many so few events in the ground truth in the web page of IEC, but we have you can see in Latin America we have the condition here for we have many events in the Pacific ring. This means that the number of events must be bigger. That means something happened with that we are not sharing some data. Like in some we majority of the station close to place where we want to monitor. In this case, like in Costa Rica, we want to monitor the central part of Costa Rica. We want to monitor the volcanoes that could affect the population in the central part of the Costa Rica. That means the concentration of the station are in this part, in the central part of Costa Rica, because there is where the majority of the population is established. But when we do it, one small search in the catalog, we see the number of possible ground truth events, let's say 5 ground truth 5 events are bigger. But in this case, we have at least around 700 from 2010 in our catalog. But still, we need to remove some of them because they are deeper. But meaning that still we have more opportunity to share data and to increase the number of ground truth events in the catalog. As we can see, there is the boundary here in the boundary between Costa Rica and Panama, Costa Rica, and Nicaragua. We still have many events, like here in southern Costa Rica, we have a triple junction. There are many earthquakes in this part of the country, in the border. That means for locating this earthquake, we need to have also seismic station in the Panama side. That's, as we can see here, one of the earthquakes happened in 2019, in May 2019, 6.2 events. We use only the Costa Rica station that are in the west side of this epicenter. We will not have condition to say that this is a ground truth event because the location will be poorly. In this case, we need to have not only for one event, we need to have this constantly. That's why we said that we need to share data also with the neighbor country and to have a on-day project with them. Let's say, well, the capacity also, as already Michelle pointed to, the capacity, the role that CTBTO have played with creating or building capacity, it is important. It is important to maintain on the time. We will use this capacity to characterize acoustic local acoustic source and improve aircraft location. That's mean one of the things that we can improve. We can let's say share data and improve the IMSC location is to have some temporary deployment of equipment in the country. Let's say in this case we have almost for a year deployment of infrasound station in Costa Rica, and that's help with to characterize the local acoustic source. That means this is important for also for the treaty to continue with this type of installation, temporary network, and also to continue with this building capacity. But as Atalay mentioned, perhaps this capacity is not last longer. We need to see and to find a way for this capacity to stay longer in the time. It's not only let's say 1 week, but 1 month. After 1 month, local people forget everything. But we need a way, perhaps podcasts or something that right now we have this technology, the internet, and now we can do many courses in this way, and that will be maintain the capacity on longer. That means this will be one of the big opportunity for us to maintain. Well, I think that when you develop good relationship and collaborate over time with other NDC, as we do it here in Latin America, where we are trying to maintain and develop good relationship with the other member of NDC in the region. This will be allowed, the people will feel more confident to contribute with regional data for the treaty monitoring. And this will be better for validating velocity model or for locate local earthquake. The communication between two regions will help in sharing data and experience. And this will increase the number of GT5 events and help with the IMS bulletin. I think this is what I have to present. I will be open to discuss more with perhaps this relationship with other NDC in the Latin America, perhaps with other countries. And this will be, I think the education will be found a principal part for this country like Costa Rica, perhaps another with like Ethiopia, as Atalay mentioned. And for me, this education to build capacity needs to stay last longer. And this is one of the challenges that we need to bypass. Well, thank you. I think I don't have more to present here, but I hope to discuss about the challenge for the local NDC, regional NDC.
Thank you, Ronnie. So you also highlighted the issue of capacity, and I think this is something that we will have to come back to later in the discussion. So let me invite now Noten Titus who is serves as a chief geophysicist at the Geological Survey, Ministry of Mines and Energy in Libya, to give his take on this issue as well. Now, then the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on this panel as well. And we've so far had some really great views and insights. It was not my plan, but I think it will bring the presentation a little bit more home if we look at my country, Namibia. And I'm going to quickly try to see if I can't share my screen. But before I do that, we have a very different setup. So I am running an office that was approved by our Office of the Prime Minister. It's called Crustal Geophysics, and it has to handle all CTBTO affairs. So there's been great progress in that regard, that actually now we have a set of staff members assigned just to look at CTBTO matters. The harsh reality, however, is that when the office was started, I think we would have had something like 5 or 6 staff members to start with. In 2016, 2017, there was almost a collapse in funding that started at that time. So 5 years later, we haven't really moved, except having the people that we've had since the beginning of that time. But in the meanwhile, I think for a small office like ours, we had no other option but to look at cooperating not only regionally, but within the CTBT community, with Ndcs, with IMS operators, because for one, like Michelle said, yes, there are forums, but we are mostly faced with, when a problem occurs, you would want to solve it at that time. The issue that we really sit with is actually finding our people that are willing to commit to the CTBT and work for the CTBT, from a Namibian perspective, because most of that skills you will have geoscientists or geologists and some people with physics, and those skills are generally snapped up by the mining industry. It's where if you are working for an agency like ours or for government like ours, the salaries just don't compare. And for young scientists who are fresh graduates, this is their focus. So once you, however, do get into the CTBT, if I can call it that, the CTBT family, because even in Vienna, it's a very small staff complement, to be quite honest. But what I think is a really powerful staff complement, because the amount of activities that has to happen is so big and wide. So our idea is to just accept that it will be a small team, and how do we do that? So the attack mode of building strong relationships will always be there. And I think Michelle highlighted something that was really very powerful. When we do share data, for us as scientists, we would like to have as much data as possible. But for those authorizing, your exchange of data, either, like Michelle said, it's a revenue stream that you need to say, well, we need to share it freely. So sometimes that argument doesn't help so far. And then the second thing, which is really true, is this: are we exposing ourselves for being spied upon? And these are some really real challenges we face, for example, with sharing data. Where we know that the borders, don't stop where the national borders stop. So this is a real challenge for us. Atlai also mentioned, this holding on to the skills and particularly in the CTBT, for us, it takes a long time to train somebody. You're looking at least at 3 years before You have some that come up to speed very quickly, and you have some, but to really commit to this, to the CTBT, even the person that works on these issues has to sort of commit in some way their future to understand, why are we doing this? Why are we monitoring treaties? So in the beginning, the training is really exciting for young scientists. They get to go to Vienna. They get to go to other countries, and this is in the beginning very attractive, and it's very, very nice. For us, that's been with the CTBT now for quite some time, that wears off, and then you start concerning yourself about other things. For example, in my case, we don't seem to talk about entry into force that much. We don't bring that discussion a lot to the agenda. When we are losing, I have that concern that we're going to lose what we say institutional knowledge, not in the organization as in the CTBT, but more in terms of the worldwide knowledge and experience of when there was nuclear testing, on a regular basis. And then the CTBT came in, and now a lot of the young discussions that I hear is, is it still necessary to monitor? Is it still, why are we still doing that? So losing that institutional knowledge has been my experience. And how do you get that across to say, we've still got nuclear weapons, we still need to monitor. People still have that kind of technology. I mean, here we sit next to South Africa, who has, 20, 30 years ago, dismantled their program. People would normally say, yeah, but, here in the African continent, it's not really something that we feel, it's not really, I wouldn't say a priority to us, but it's not a real threat. If you talk, for example, about apartheid, everybody in this part of the world jumps up and ears are pitched, and that is how we respond to these things. Whereas in other countries, when you talk about nuclear weapons, people have the same response to that as we have here. So when we exchange ideas, when we collaborate, I think for a small establishment like ours with really a few people, 4 or 5 people, we have got no other method but to cooperate with the people around us. I think the CGS has helped us a couple of years ago by sending over a team of seismologists that helped with a specific issue we had, a national issue that we had, a seismic problem that we had. And I think that response from them very much was built on the relationship we had through the work of the CTBT. That you have that opportunity to say, okay, I think I spoke with Michelle at Working Group B. I said, Michelle, we need to get these things, and just that ability to speak face to face with somebody in a CTBT setting helps already substantially bringing a problem or getting assistance and doing treaty monitoring. So I don't know how many minutes I've already been going on here, but this issue of training, this issue of capacity building, we invest in the people. In our setting, we have that problem that we tend to lose them, and we almost have to start, from afresh. Some of the issues I think that can address. I mean, Michelle brought some nice examples. I have again been thinking of, if you have regular scheduled training or workshops, let's say in Ethiopia or Namibia for that matter. I think 2 years ago, we also showed an interest that we would like to host the infrasound technology workshop, maybe at the next occasion. So if you have also regularly those let's say a training occurring in Namibia or in South Africa or Botswana or Ethiopia, doesn't matter, but almost every year or every second year, you have that kind of training or that kind of workshop taking place there. I think it will, like Michelle says, one, you have a regional center that most probably supports the NDCs. You could have regularly scheduled workshops and training sessions in certain areas as well, because having a workshop for us, the RSDT workshop we had, was for politically quite a big thing, especially in our ministry, that you have all these scientists coming from around the world, culminating in Namibia for the CTBT. And people took note of it here, and not to break that momentum, this was the argument for the ITW sometime in the future in Namibia. So I've not really shared my screen, but I think regional, this regional cooperation, sharing of data, they have their challenges, and then you have your specific country challenges. For instance, in our case, when we service our seismic network, for argument's sake, just the national one, it's driving from Cape Town to Cairo. It's a 5,000 kilometer round trip, and you ask that of your technician, on a daily basis. I'm not on a daily basis, but you ask that of your technician. So I think this issue that Atlai pointed out, that Africa is a big country, big continent. It's with the countries as well. They are huge countries. I think if you're in a European setting, the size, you don't really think about how big a country is. So in that sense, we relied very much heavily on technology, few people managing technology remotely, and I think that has set us up to collaborate and to work with others, but it's not been really that successful because our main issue is holding on to the skills that we develop over time. So with that, I think I've said quite a lot, and I cede. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Yes, this is something that we should probably discuss a little bit later about holding on to the people and the skills that they acquire and not losing them to the industry, which is more financially appealing. Let me now introduce Robert Mellor. So Robert Mellor is currently, if you would like also, Robert, to share your video. So Robert Mellor is currently the executive director of the IDA project, which operates 40 global seismic stations. 10 of these stations also serve as auxiliary IMS stations. And prior to joining the University of California, San Diego in 2021, he worked for 10 years at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in the US on research related to nuclear monitoring and on-site inspection. Dr. Mellor was also on the faculty of San Diego State University for 12 years and has deployed seismic stations in Central Asia, the Middle East, and in US research interests and in the US. His research interests include locating earthquakes with INSAR and seismic instrumentation, including fiber optic sensors. So, Robert, the floor is yours, and yes, we can see you now.
Good. So, as you know, as we've mentioned, one of the big issues with seismic stations is communications, and I'm having some issues with communications to my Wi-Fi right now. So it's perhaps ironic a little bit. But yes, thank you for the introduction. I'd like to thank my other panelists for a very excellent discussion of the issues related to ground truth and sharing data. And I really don't have a whole lot I can add, but I shall try. So a little bit about, we run what we call the IDA network. There's about 40 stations. It's officially a global network, but in some ways it has many resemblance to a regional seismic. It's a very big regional seismic network would be the way I think about it. And one fundamental issue to locating earthquakes is that you need data. And you may have the greatest network in the world in principle, but if the stations are going down or not functional, or perhaps the timing, the GPS is out, it doesn't do very good. It doesn't do you much good to help locate an earthquake if the nearest station is not working. For example, we saw an example from Nbar, which is actually one of our stations, and you know, when it's working, it's great, and most of the time it does, but if it goes out, it would be a big hole. And the really fundamental part has been pointed out by Michelle and Norton is that you need the technical aspects to run this. And it's not just the seismology. You need people who have expertise in power and communications. And you need the power, and you know, there's lots of possibilities for power. There's solar, there's line power, there's all sorts of things. And communications is complicated, is especially complicated now because you've got almost so many options. You've got cell phones, you've got VSATs, you've got new kinds of satellites coming on board, and each one of them have different trade-offs in terms of power, cost, and etc. And then you've got the other emerging issue of cybersecurity. For example, you could have a station up and working, then you wouldn't want somebody to come in and hack it. So it takes quite a lot of technical skills, and especially in communication, it's difficult holding on to people because, you know, we don't pay as much as other big businesses, and you train somebody up and then they leave. And as Norton said, it's hard to hold on to. But one thing that has struck me, and especially in this meeting at the S&T, is that the IMS really has a substantial resource of experts. There's been some excellent presentations on lightning proofing station, on a next generation of stations, a modular power. And that kind of expertise, the regional stations, I think, could really benefit from. I don't know exactly how to do it. Perhaps we could do it via Zoom and that, but that's one possibility that I think the regional networks could really benefit from, because it's very hard to have experts in power and really know how to do that. And I mean, lightning is one example. For example, there are some stations that are always getting hit by lightning. And for example, now during COVID, when we can't send somebody to the station, trying to lightning is one of those things that hits the station, it goes offline, and you don't know where the problem is exactly. It could be anywhere, a number of places. And so trying to diagnose that is really difficult, especially remotely. And so really, to ensure that we get good data and good ground truth, it's important to make the stations as robust as possible, which may sound obvious, but you know, it's not always that easy. And so I think regional networks could really benefit, and perhaps some of the others who operate them could benefit from this kind of access to expertise of the IMS, and ways to work up not just the NDC in a box, but you know, how do we lightning proof a station? How can we diagnose things? And I think both parties can benefit from, if we can make the stations more sustainable now, then, as Norton was saying, okay, you have to send your technicians 5,000 kilometers somewhere. Well, if you only have to do it once a year instead of twice a year, that saves a lot of effort and time. And so that could be a really key resource that I think would be useful. And I think, as Michelle mentioned, and Ronnie, focused work groups would be one really powerful way of doing that. So I guess don't forget about the technical and the equipment aspects of running the station. That's really key. And I think that could be an area where we could make really big strides going forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I guess this COVID pandemic has been very disruptive in a lot of areas, and especially you mentioned also remote stations have been very difficult to handle and administer with, and also the workshops that Norton has mentioned. We haven't been able to do as many workshops in the last couple of years as we would like. Of course, we're using now the technologies and all these remote workshops, but I guess it's not the same thing, I think, as actually being in a live session and interacting with other people. So thank you all for your presentations, and I can ask some questions that have been made from the audience, and please continue sending questions, everybody. So we have a question from Carl Koch regarding the sparseness of the IMS network in Africa. I think Atalay mentioned this. So he's asking if we could provide a number, like a density of stations per those square kilometers in Africa compared to other regions, and if this level is adequate based on seismicity levels and the fact that Africa is fairly tectonically stable continent, except for the eastern part, maybe. Would anyone have any idea about this, if any numbers or even a qualitative, not quantitative? Maybe we should research this in our in the IDC here. But so let
Yeah.
Yes, Michelle?
Yeah, well, I can take a shot at it. Yes, no, the Ims network is quite sparse in Africa, as Atulay mentioned. There have been numerous projects to try and improve that, well, to improve the number of stations throughout the continent. And then, of course, each country does have their own as well. However, the gaps are still huge. Yes, Africa is fairly stable, but as Atulay quite rightly pointed out, the seismicity that goes down along the Rift Valley is quite substantial. So there are gaps still. However, there have been many projects to try and improve those gaps that covers the seismicity, and the main problem is then to make it sustainable. That is probably one of the biggest problems, and that's why I was trying to reach out and trying to say that to be able to make it sustainable, one does need to address certain aspects. Look at how the hosts can benefit from it. And when I mean by sustainable, it also means, like Robert quite rightly says, how to keep those technically as well, how to keep it going, how to send data. So these are still the problems that we are facing, although there have been many projects to address the number of stations, although I don't unfortunately have that number at the tip of my fingertips. But yes, it is something that we still need to work on. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And I should say that I think Atulay, you showed some stations, IMS stations in Africa, but we should say that these are only the eastern and southern part of Africa. I think there are some more stations who have a primary seismological station in Toronto, in Niger, and I think a couple more.
Yes, yes, I do know that the stations that I listed are only in the eastern part of the continent, but there are some in South Africa, Southern Africa region, including Namibia, Botswana, I guess, and Egypt, Morocco, Niger, West Africa as well. But even then, still for the size of the continent, the number of stations or distribution in Africa is very sparse. Maybe in connection with this, what I would like to comment in general is that CTBTO, the primary goal is, is the nuclear prohibition for the cause of humanity, and also being affiliated to the United Nations, even disaster management like volcanoes, earthquake hazard, and the likes in developing countries are really concerns. So probably if we can, merge this kind of missions, the facility is there in CTBTO. Some small issues that you may consider are really insignificant in the developed world. It's a lot for the developing countries. So if we can really merge synergy and commitment, some small facilities from small, abandoned equipment in Europe or in America or even in CTBTO can make a difference, huge difference in Africa, for instance, or in South America or in Asia in general. So as long as it is for the good cause of humanity, the facility can be exploited for other missions. Like if we were to use some stations in Africa, we could have warned the Nyiragongo eruption ahead of time, and we could have saved some disaster or losses on property, for instance. So I think it's good to think in that direction. And as it was also pointed by Michel, it might be a little bit cumbersome to build capacity in every country. But if there are some clusters or regional centers, it might be easy. so that the capability of monitoring treaty relevant events might be easier that way. And then we can go into country level capacity building. Yeah, thank you. That's what I would like to add.
Thank you. Thank you, Atale. There is also another relevant question, and also I had noted, you said that some countries, they do not have access to the data that they record and send to the IDC. And there is a question why these data are not free for member states. And so here,
yes, yes, because in this working group that I mentioned earlier, once in 6 months or in 1 year, we come together to merge data together. So I realized this problem in, for instance, some years back in Zambia. Lusaka was not accessible to our Zambian colleagues in Lusaka. And also even Kimbo, they do, but not on regular basis. So it's not partly because of the problem from the CTBTO side. Sometimes also a problem from our side in Africa. You know, it's really a challenge to monitor activities on daily basis. So once we get the training and the culture is there, then through time it will exponentially die out. And even using, you know, GeoTool or any other facilities to be installed in our laboratory, we will somehow it dies out, and then we host the station, but that we will not see the data. So the cases that I mentioned were real. And the other thing is also the data format is a little bit different from other formats, like the mini-series, which is quite common. The MS format is a little bit different. So the Seismic is the one that we use normally, and GeoTool is quite common there. And this difference now SESCOM3 is coming into the picture. So technology difference is also another issue, so that we stuck in one technology and we forget the other, and eventually we also lose the culture of gaining data and the observatory culture. So that's true. So so we host the station and we don't see the data. That's quite common in a number of cases.
and you're talking not about bulletin, you're talking about the waveforms as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, waveform as well. Yeah, waveform as well, both parameter and waveform.
So, Ronnie, what about in Latin America, in South America? Is there similar problems with the data sharing? Are they available to the member states, and do you have issues with the different formats?
No, we don't have problem with that. Perhaps the problem, as Atala mentioned, is the lack of knowledge how to do it. But or perhaps also formalism, some group they don't have access because they are not part of the NDC or they are not connected with the NDCs, the local NDC. Perhaps in that way, the lack of knowledge for the people that how to download data. But in general, we don't have problem with access to the IMS data.
Okay. So we have another question there. Does the African area help progress the IMS stations? I'm not really sure what this would mean. Maybe Hediya, you could give like you would give another chat an explanation to clarify a little bit this question. But in the meantime, we could go to the capacity that has been probably mentioned by all of you. And in the beginning, I got the feeling that when you were talking about holding on to the capacity, it was mostly about how to keep up training people with newer technologies and newer developments. But then this other issue came about, which is to keep the actual people in this area and not hemorrhaging stuff to other disciplines. So yeah, this is probably something that we should try to work on. I'm not sure how we could do this, but also it was, for me, it was impressive that an issue is so the fact that we don't have really nuclear explosions is creates this pleasant problem that we lose knowledge and memory of the actual problem, really. And people really ask, is this really an issue that we should tackle now and put in resources about?
So if I may speak, may I
Yes.
address it? So one thought about the training, if we can make things simpler and more modular, maybe we can reduce the amount of training that is required to become an expert in that. And it could almost be part of a pathway from, say, from technical school, and then they work the station, and then maybe they go on to somewhere else. So it would be more as part of career progression. And that would require more modularization of things and more documentation, so the training isn't quite as difficult. And then the point about monitoring is good, but I think we see there is the volcanic eruption. There is lots of interest in that. There are many things that this data can be used to address other issues, not just nuclear monitoring. And that may be the future going forward, at least in my opinion.
So we have another question about the Norton mentioned the value of hosting CTBTO events in raising or maintaining the status of the NDCs. And the question is if there have been regular rotation of events considered from capacity building. It is important for the state parties to volunteer and advocate to host events. This would seem to be an easy lift, provide NDCs a higher profile. And I think I could say that there's only so much trainings that we can do every year, and but of course, not any. I think you mentioned that you would like to host more workshops, right? You have already hosted the RSTT workshop, and you have volunteered for the infrasound workshop, and I think Costa Rica as well has held infrasound and RSTT workshops.
Yeah, in our case, we haven't hosted the infrasound technology workshop. My view is to have a level playing field for all the technologies that are employed with the CTBT. I think on the African continent we focus a lot on seismology, and quite rightly so. It's there is good grounds for that. But I think just when you mentioned, you can only have so many trainings, I think one solution could be, and this was also discussed last week at the OSI expert meeting, is where member states can maybe notify and invite PTS staff to participate in monitoring or training or workshops that is most probably related to the CTBT, or it doesn't necessarily need to be related, but it could employ some of the technologies used for treaty verification. In that way, I think that there's also, an exchange with PTS staff on what is available in the country. I think, and what can be used maybe in future for a CTBT for a CTBTO training or a workshop. And I think that also keeps the engine going in terms of not only taking participants from one country to another country, but it could be that in various countries you at least have one or two trainings that makes use of a CTBT verification technology, or something that's really related, most probably that will interest the PTS, even if it's just for awareness of what's happening in that country.
So, Robert, I want to ask you, since you have this experience with deploying seismic stations all over the world, so in Asia and in the Middle East, in the US as well, my question would be, you know that we only consider for verification purposes events that have magnitude 3.5 and more. So my question would be, with if we make the networks as dense as we want, let's say, so how low do you think that we could move this limit in the magnitude in which we could verify nuclear explosions?
I think that really, I think some of the others may have better idea. That really depends on the noise background as well, because if you're in the near the ocean or the islands, you have a very high noise level and you're almost never going to see it. Whereas if you're in the middle of Central Asia or Middle East, and with low attenuation, you may be able to push it out farther. But getting ground truth below 3.5 will be difficult, I think, in many areas. Maybe in the middle of Africa, away from the oceans, maybe in Central Asia, it might be possible. But you're really constrained by background noise levels to a large degree, would be my opinion. Now, I guess the other thing would be if some of the newer technologies in, say, machine learning of pulling signals out of noise may be applicable. And so if you can get better, if now they're kind of relying, it's kind of at the level of people picking P phase and S phases and automatic pickers, but if you can improve the capability of pulling phases out of very out of high noise or maybe large arrays, maybe some of the newer technologies like fiber optics, you might be able to do better. But I think it's going to be difficult to go much below that in most areas, would be my opinion.
It should be a combination.
I'm probably wrong.
It could be a combination of probably both algorithms, but also hardware enhancements for this. There's also a question for you, Robert. So the question is, what are some of the most cost-effective investments in communication infrastructure that NDCs and regional seismic networks with limited funding can make to improve their data availability?
So that's an interesting one. I think the one that's made a big difference to us is really cell phone and the capability to link things up by cell phone. Now, I know the IMS, the auxiliary and all that always uses VSAT for various reasons, security and that. But cell phones are really, it's generally cheap, it's effective, and people in the area generally have the capability to run it. Everybody knows how to run a cell phone. Most people know how to hook up a router. For example, if you're in the South Atlantic and your VSAT goes down, you're stuck until you can send out another one. But most places you can go to there will be a cell phone resources. So I think cell phones are a really key thing. MBAR is an example of one where we're thinking we would like to go to cell phone. The drawback for us, at least for cell phones, is that if you're running 40 stations and each one is running a different cell phone company, and you're having to talk with, say, Tajikistan at midnight and trying to diagnose a cell phone, it's very difficult for us. So you really have to rely on the local people to, I mean, I have problems getting my cell phone service in California fixed, let alone 12 hours away in Tajikistan. But I think cell phone is really an effective way of doing that. There may be newer technologies like these low Earth orbit, Elon Musk Starlink, but we'll have to see how that goes. I don't know how effective that will be, but I think cell phone is really a good technology for now, and it's really expanding, and it's cheap and easy and available.
Sorry, Christos?
Yes, Michelle.
Yeah, I'd just like to support what Robert has said. We've found exactly the same thing with using cell phone for communication, for data transmission. Very reliable. Okay, if obviously if you have the option to have 2 SIM cards, so if the one network were to go down, you have a backup. But what we're beginning to, our entire network within South Africa, for instance, is on cell phone, and we found it far more reliable than anything else, and of course more cost effective than the other options. And what we've noticed throughout Africa as well, in our collaborations with other countries, we've noticed that the cell phone networks certainly are quite effective. Thank you.
So the cell phones are connected continuously and they're relaying the data in almost real time. Is this how this works? Okay, that sounds quite impressive.
That's good.
Yeah, maybe I can come in there because the CGS helped us start up our seismic network, and since that time we've first been on GSM, and now I think the slowest tower runs on 3G at least. But it's our biggest risk because once the station goes down, it's 700 kilometers you have to drive to get that thing fixed. And we have what Michelle says, the one with the 2 SIM cards. We haven't implemented it, but for example, we've got one station that's not been visited for 2 years. So, it's really improved substantially. And that is usually due to the uptake of the technology, in the rural areas. So it's working very well for us as well.
Right. There's a question for, I think, all the panelists here from Ronan Lebras. So he says that, of course, regional velocity models are important for locating REB events, and what mechanism would be practical to increase accuracy of the models used at the IDC by using local knowledge in your regions? Who would like to address this question first? I think
Can you repeat the question?
So the question is, what mechanism would be practical to increase accuracy of the velocity models used by the IDC by using local knowledge in your region?
How to, well, this, we ICT worked in Costa Rica in 2015. One of the things that we did to validate the velocity model was to share data, and they sent us several events in from the continent, from the Caribbean, from the South America, from Mexico, and each one in each country locate that event. And we share all this data, and this data was used to validate the velocity model. I think this will be important when perhaps we do it such type of workshop where we concentrate with specific events that, let's say, if something happening in South America, perhaps it's not so important for us in Central America. But still, we are seeing, but we don't care and we don't share that data. But I know that ISC is pushing us to share those type of data. Perhaps sometimes we don't see that that knowledge when the people use the data, that people don't care, that don't share that data. But perhaps that could be one way to improve velocity modeling globally, using local information. Because we are more concentrated with local events, but we want to know what happened if the earthquake occurred close to our center, to where the population is setting. But we don't care about a global event, but perhaps need to be some way to share that data. That's we got that data, but we don't share.
Thank you, Ronnie. Would anyone else like to address this question? One question is, of course, also how can we motivate Ndcs and national networks to submit candidate ground truth events to the ISC? We have right now, I think, in Latin America and Africa, the ground truth events are not maybe as many as possible, as many as there are in North America or Europe and Eastern Europe. But that's probably something we should think about, how we can motivate seismologists to submit such events. So we're coming close to the end. There is a big picture question here. What is the new challenge for regional data related to the CTBT, the treaty, after 25 years from now? So if you could give your thoughts, each one of you, on this. Michelle, would you like to start?
Could you just repeat it one more time? So what is the new?
What is the new challenge for regional data related to the CTBT treaty after 25 years? Where do you see that going?
Wow, that's a tough one. Where do I start first? I don't know if there is. What concerns me is there's not so much a new challenge. What I've noticed, the same challenges are still there. I feel we haven't suitably addressed the challenges that have always been there for regional treaty monitoring. So I would be pushed to try and point out a new one. I think we still need to, like I mentioned, we need to try and maintain the momentum through probably, as I mentioned, just these regular regional interactions of some sort. We've got to try and come up with ideas to make the station sustainable within the various countries, so that the hosts can also benefit. I think it's very important, especially if you want buy-in, you need to try and think of something along those lines. So all of these things are challenges that we've had and still do have, and we have been addressing it slowly through the years, but I think we still do have a way to go, quite frankly. So so like I said, I don't see any new particular challenges. I just see the same ones that we need to still address. Thank you.
So sustainability and capacity and mutual benefit, then I keep these words. Atalay, would you like to add your 5 cents?
Yes, I think the challenge will be if we keep on doing the way we do it now. Because as I tried to reflect earlier, if we capitalize on the existing natural events to use the IMS technology and verify and encourage regional integration, data exchange, and the likes, for the sake of rapid response on natural events, then that will be a good test for the treaty events as well, for the CTBTO purpose. I mean, we could have capitalized on the existing natural disaster activities or regional cooperation, so that the system or the regional cooperation will be ready for CTBTO purpose. So, but the way it is now is not, as it has been widely discussed in this panel, it is not the way it should be. So the challenge will be if we keep on working on the way it is now.
Thank you,
That's what I feel.
Thank you. Norten, you have raised your hand. I think you would like to say something.
Yeah, for me, the challenge will be to do it better than other global network. This is to locate that source better than other global network. That will be the challenge. When it's a local event, to be very close to our local event, not 20 or 40 kilometers, and do it better than other global network. That will be a big challenge.
Thank you. Norten?
Yes, I just think the biggest challenge still remains the white elephant. When is the treaty getting into force? Like I said, I think in future, I have a different view on the importance of the CTBT. I see a lot of African nations having shown their interest in expanding nuclear technology, and I think to ensure that and to show that Africa has got no interest in nuclear weapons, we will need the IMS and we'll need the IDC just to show, that this is not the focus. The focus is for that technology to provide electricity. So I think in the future, the IMS data will be really, really important for us going forward on the African continent. But I think the biggest challenge we have is to make sure that what we are doing does not lose the initial intent. I have a different view of what Robert said, but I think that there should still remain at the top of the pile, treaty monitoring, ensuring, because it's been so powerful. It is once the CTBT came in, people heeded it, and finally we can start talking about exchanging technologies for the good of humanity, and Africa needs that technology. So I think if we continue in the next few years, we really need to address this issue of the treaty coming into force so that it has a relevance, and that we can, for those people taking over, the young generation, that there is a reason why this has been set up, and there is a purpose for it to be maintained and improved in future. That's what I would add there.
So that's an important challenge for the future. Maybe monitoring, focusing monitoring also in the African region as well, the African continent. And last but not least, Robert, would you like to add your view?
Just
please?
like I agree with the other points, and I guess, it's kind of a cliche. With every challenge, there's opportunities. 2 years ago, when I was at the S&T in Vienna, I could not imagine that we would be running an almost virtual S&T, and it would be working effectively. And so there's many challenges in keeping networks going, sustainability, but I'm optimistic that things will continue. So, and I think we'll become a new generation, will refresh things and maybe do things better.
Thank you for closing with this optimistic note, Robert. So I think we have reached the end of this panel discussion. Thank you all so much for this very interesting discussion and your views and important insights on this. And hopefully next time we meet in Vienna. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye, Atalay. Bye.